My journey is a small part of it. I want people to join me to realize that they are capable of achieving anything they want to, and it's more than adventure.
I have the great pleasure in welcoming Preet Chandi, also known as Polar Preet. An adventurer and an explorer, her story isn't just about endurance in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, though. It's about resilience, risk-taking, and redefining what's possible.
My aim is to go solo and unsupported to the North Pole. And if I am successful, I'd be the first woman in history to do that journey solo. I'm very big on you can't fail unless you try, so why not try anyway?
We should and could learn from failure, and probably more than you learn from success.
How we deal with the negatives or the setbacks is really important as well. I genuinely believe you can learn from everybody, and I actually think it's one of my greatest strengths, the ability to learn from everybody. How do you prepare for something that's harder than anything you've ever done before? You need to be able to manage yourself in those conditions. If you make mistakes in those conditions, it can go wrong very quickly. I've heard people say, just believe in yourself. It's not that easy to just believe in yourself. And how do you do it? You do it anyway. You do it when you don't believe in yourself.
Hello, and welcome to everyone for the latest in our series of Sparks Talks. I'm Tom Ellis, CEO of Brand Genetics and also longtime chair of the Global Innovation Forum. I have the great pleasure in welcoming Preet Chandi, also known as Polar Preet, to Sparks today. Preet is a former British Army officer and a record-breaking polar explorer. Preet holds a number of world records, including for the longest solo unsupported one-way polar ski journey overall, which must be quite incredible. An adventurer and an explorer, her story isn't just about endurance in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, though. It's about resilience, risk-taking, and redefining what's possible. So Preet, we're delighted that you can join us for this Sparks Talk. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, very excited. My kids, normally they think my job is very boring, but they were fascinated to know that I was going to be speaking to a polar explorer. They think I've changed job. Look, Preet, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and frankly, how you came to be an adventurer, an explorer.
Yeah, so I'm from Derby, and that's where I was born and bred. And I joined the army when I was 19, which I think was my introduction to the outdoors, really. It's the first time I ever went camping was when I was 19 with the military. So it opened up a very different world to me. And I think outside of the military, my challenges just got a little bit bigger and bigger. So I did a half marathon, then I tried a marathon. And, I think the more we do, the more we realize we're capable of. So they got a bit bigger. And I was looking for something. I was looking for something big to do, thinking it would probably be a run because I enjoyed running. And my old boss said to me, "What about Antarctica?" And I said, "Not a chance." Thinking I didn't know anything about this place at all. But that became the appeal to me. Like, how amazing would it be to go and do something I don't know anything about? So, as a modern day adventurer, I went onto Google and typed in, how do you get to Antarctica? Just really not knowing where to start. And where do you start when you don't know about things? And, now I've learned, and I've learned way more about adventurers. I've read about them. But at the time, and this is only 5 years ago, I really didn't know very much. So it was, asking anybody I could find, any question I could think of.
I love it. And I mean, look, we are in the world of innovation for many of the people who'll be tuning into this. And I think most of the time we're trying to push our boundaries, and actually something fresh and not being afraid to start something fresh is really important. So that's a great lesson already. And look, let's start off by saying, we've talked a bit about where you've been, but you're also off. This isn't the end. You're not hanging up your boots. You're off somewhere a little bit different. Where are you going next, Preet?
Yeah, so after doing 3 expeditions in Antarctica, to 2 all via the South Pole, I then thought, I wonder if I could go to the North Pole. And again, not really knowing much about it. And this seems to be a pattern for me. So I started looking into it and realised the North Pole is actually very different from the South Pole. So in Antarctica, I've done my expeditions on land. When I've been in the Antarctic summer, it's during November to January, and I've got 24 hours of daylight. The geographic North Pole sits in the middle of the sea, so I'll be traveling over sea ice. And the way the sea has kind of shifted towards Canada, it's over kind of big blocks, like a maze-like structure that I'll have to go over with pressure ridges. And then when I manage to get past those sections, there's sections of open water that I have to get in and swim. And of course, there are polar bears in the Arctic, so I will be carrying a firearm with me just to scare them away. So hopefully none come too close. And yeah, that my aim is to go solo and unsupported to the North Pole. And if I am successful, I'd be the first woman in history to do that journey solo, and then the first to have done both. Now, it's a challenge like no other, if I'm honest. Like the expeditions I've done in Antarctica, they don't compare. This will be the hardest thing I've ever tried. It really will, and there's a very high chance of failure. But I'm very big on you can't fail unless you try, so why not try anyway? And I think even if I knew, if someone said to me, there's no way, you just cannot get there. Like, what an amazing journey to try and do anyway. And I think there's this huge fear of failure, and I think it stops us from doing a lot of things. And actually, it's okay to fail. I'm not saying it's not scary, because it never feels great, does it? You never want to fail.
No.
But my biggest trip actually in Antarctica was my second trip, which was 922 miles, 70 days. And I didn't make the end of that trip. That was a trip I failed. And I learned more from that trip than I did anything else.
Wow. Well, I mean, good luck to you, first of all, for the Arctic. And I think we will have your GoFundMe, because obviously you need support to do these amazing trips. And what an amazing cause to be supporting the first woman to do that. So please, if you're watching this, and whether as a corporate or a personal, I think what a great thing to support. So look out for that GoFundMe.
I don't think when I was younger, I don't think I'd ever heard that it's okay to fail. You know, in my head previously, why would failure is not good. And it's not that, you fail and that's okay sometimes, but you're trying to succeed. Like, failure was never associated with positive things for me. And I set out to do this huge trip, which I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I would fail. I thought I'd make it. My first trip was a shorter part of it. So, I trained the right way. I had, done an expedition in Antarctica already. So I went into this trip thinking that, and I was planning to do the land crossing as well. So something that I thought was achievable for me to do. And from the start of the trip, I made a few little mistakes, which became huge because of where I am. And I felt like I dug this hole that I just could not get out of. And I've got this little voice in my head for most of the journey telling me that you failed. And that was hard. It was hard to run away from it. It was hard to escape this voice. And I just couldn't. It's there. I'm trying to, have this positive reinforcement that's louder, but it's still there, and it's there for the whole 70 days. And I didn't enjoy a single day of it. I'll be honest. And there's no rose tinted glasses here. It was a tough journey, and I had a couple of injuries, and it just got harder. And by the end, or a week before I finished, I speak to the logistics company on the satellite phone, who basically confirm what I know, right? That I'm not going to make the end. I've run out of time, and they will be picking me up from a place they think I can make it in the 70 days. So that last week, I'm kind of moving into nothingness. I'm not going to make my end. I've just been told, that's been confirmed. So I'm now moving for the last week, knowing that I'm not going to make it. There's no hope left. And again, at those points, often I was actually just counting. I was counting to 100 over and over again. I finally make it to where they've come to pick me up. And I remember feeling relief that I was over. And I wasn't in a great place. I'd lost 20 kilograms of fat and muscle, and I was struggling quite a lot at this point. And I remember saying to Rob Smith, who was one of the guys that picked me up, that it was just so hard. And I think for me, justifying why I hadn't made it. And when I finished, and this is actually the trip that I got 2 records. I got the longest solo unsupported one-way polar ski expedition overall. But I didn't make the land crossing, which is, of course, what I was aiming to do. And a lot of people said to me when I finished, oh, you didn't fail, and again, potentially reframing it. And I thought it was quite interesting because people don't like the word. And I said, well, I did fail because I didn't actually, do what I intended to do. I finished in a point basically in the middle of nowhere, right? This is just a point that the aircraft could park, and they thought that I could get to with that week left. So I realized quite soon that people don't like that term. So I don't think it needs to be I reframed. Like it's the best failure I had, and not because it was hard. That year I struggled a lot. But then less than a year later, and actually in the same year, the end of that year, I went back and I got the female speed record to the South Pole. Now I've gotten better at skiing, but not a skier. I learned in my adult years. I would have been walking on skis, but I learned so much from that trip that somebody like me, technically a non-skier, was able to go get a female speed record, and I beat it by over a day. And I think it was because of everything I learned from that failure. So that's where my head goes mentally. And that speed record, it was just over 31 days. It was hard, but nowhere near as hard. Every time it got challenging, I would remind myself of the 70-day trip. And that was much more challenging, if I'm honest with you. And any like hard times I get into, I remind myself of those miserable times, and they were miserable. But I think there's a power in misery. And it doesn't have to be that bad, obviously. But the accountability I took from that trip, there's so many external factors we can blame. The weather was rough, the storms, of course, the weather was rough. It's Antarctica. What are the internal factors? What could I have changed? What mistakes did I make? And I wrote them down, all of them, in the notes on my phone when I made them, so I didn't forget. And I'm not making myself feel bad, but taking that accountability means I can learn from my mistakes. If I blamed it purely on all the external factors, and this is, the reason why everything went wrong, I'm not then changing anything. I'm not taking accountability to know what I can learn from it, and I'm probably not going to change results for myself either.
I think there's so much in that. I mean, apart from wow, right? Again, just thinking of some of our audience, and we've talked about the concept of failure and innovation. Innovation is fundamentally, the odds are stacked against you. You're adventuring, right? You're pushing the boundaries. The odds are stacked against you. I think that sense of accountability, too often people want to shunt a failure away under the carpet, don't they? Forget about it. But actually what you can learn from it, and by writing it down as you go and looking back and being really honest with yourself, means that you can move much further forward. And you turned that failure, let's use that phrase, even though you had huge amounts clearly that you benefited from it, into a massive success later that year. So in 12 months, less than, you managed to turn that around. So again, I think we've all got to look at, recognize that there is a lot of risk involved in many of the things we do that push us out of our comfort zone, but we should and could learn from failure, and probably more than you learn from success, right?
100%. And I'm not saying go out there and take every risk, right? Like, even, I mean, I have a huge spreadsheet of all the potential risks, how I can mitigate them if, that does happen, what I'm then doing, how am I preparing? So
Yeah.
I'm not going into anything just, I'm just going to go and try this. I know it takes a lot of preparation, but, with all that preparation, things still go wrong.
Yeah.
Things still, so how are we going to deal with the things that go wrong? And even in the moment as well, some of the mistakes I made in that moment, it's so frustrating. And I tell myself, okay, can I change that now? No. Okay, then you move on, you get on with it. And that mindset I think is really important. On my first trip, I actually didn't cry once, not because I didn't want to. I had some tough moments, but I told myself it's not going to help me now. Wait till I'm in the tent. And then by the time I was in the tent, I felt better. Second trip was a whole different story, but I think how we deal with the negatives or the setbacks is really important as well.
You've talked really about something I would term a pre-mortem or a risk audit, whereby you've actually, in a very detailed way, by the sounds of things, looked at all the things that might drive you towards failure, right? Might create failure in the system. Again, I think that's a wonderful lesson for us, because people are naturally optimistic. That's a positive in many things, but every project carries a lot of risks. Whether it's going to the South Pole, the North Pole, or whether it's trying to create some sort of new idea, bring it to market, etc. Actually having a really careful audit of that can help you mitigate some of those things, or when they do come up, have a plan of action, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's just smart to think about it. I think fair enough to be optimistic. Of course I want to try and make it to North Pole, but I also want to be realistic. And that really isn't, it's not me saying that, oh, I have this little of a chance. It's saying, okay, what can I do to make that 2%, 3%? Or what can I do to make it 5%? So I want to be as realistic as possible. That the first 2 weeks of that trip will be harder than anything I've ever done before. And there's a reason not many people have done this. In the last 10 years, no one's been there solo. Like it's logistically and physically, mentally, everything is incredibly challenging. So what can I do in those first 2 weeks? I know I'm not going to enjoy it. I think it's going to be incredibly, incredibly challenging. And how do you prepare for something that's harder than anything you've ever done before? And that's a challenging one. I went to Northern Canada earlier this year, and there was an area with a fair amount of bears there, and I was trying to acclimatise to fear, which isn't easy to do. And I got there, I was in my tent, I was afraid. I didn't go too far away from the kind of hotel in the place, and I just did a couple of days out and a couple of days back in, and I had a dog with me, so the dog would warn me and bark if there were bears close by. But it's not easy, and none of those times am I comfortable. There's no, I'm never comfortable in those times. And even the trips I've done in Antarctica, and don't get me wrong, there were some days I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But the days where there have been growth, I don't think I've been comfortable in those spaces. And it's not that I go into everything now and I think, oh, my comfort zone is so much bigger, which it is. But I'm just used to that feeling of being uncomfortable, which means I'll put myself in harder places or new places because I want to continue to grow. And now that uncomfortable feeling, I'm just a little bit used to it. It's still comfortable. It's still, not. I wouldn't say it's the best feeling in the world, and I try to find that bit of comfort in the uncomfortableness. I do, but it still is uncomfortable. Okay, let's get used to this feeling because I've been here before, and I know that there's growth there.
So Preet, that I love getting used to feeling uncomfortable. It's like anything in life, practice helps, right? But why? Why do you do these things to yourself? You know this is going to be. You've had an amazingly tough trip. You're going to push yourself to something that's even harder. So what is the why that drives you? What's your purpose?
For me, so I think there's a few things here. One, I think there's a selfish reason. I think there always is. I, enjoy pushing myself, and I think it's okay to be selfish and have that reason. And then the flip side for me is it's just so much bigger than I am. I knew nothing about adventure, exploration. I joined the army without even telling my family. I remember getting frostnip when I was in Greenland on a training trip and being told by someone that they'd never actually seen frostnip. It was somebody with my colour skin before. And I just, I wanted to show that you can be from anywhere, look like anything, start on Google, typing in because you don't know where to start and go and achieve anything. And that for me is such a joy. Like every trip I do, it's bigger than just me. So there's a school competition of some sort involved there. This one, I've just set up my community interest company, so I'll be giving out grants while I'm on the ice, and there's like an under 10s, a mid-age, over 60, and a sustainability grant because it's bigger than just my journey. My journey is a small part of it. I want people to join me to realise that they are capable of achieving anything they want to, and it's more than adventure. So yes, I've decided to push my boundaries in the adventure sphere, but it could be anything, and I think I have been in so many rooms where I felt like I didn't belong, and I keep going into those rooms. Great, and you do belong in those rooms. It's just sometimes it's self-belief, and I think I've heard people say just believe in yourself. It's not that easy to just believe in yourself. And how do you do it? You do it anyway. You do it when you don't believe in yourself. You take the steps regardless.
And it's, in the stories of sport or actually in invention, right? So many times somebody runs the 4 minute mile or invents the light bulb or and then suddenly it unleashes this whole wave. Suddenly everyone breaks the 4 minute mile because it is possible. They know it's possible. But by you going out there and doing these things and putting yourself in incredibly uncomfortable positions, you're paving the way for others in all walks of life to go and do this. So it's fantastic. I mean, I'm just going to urge anyone who's watching to get their wallet out after this and go on the GoFundMe page or get their corporate sponsorship budget and direct it in Preet's direction, because this is, as she says, more than just a trip to the Arctic. It's really breaking new ground. You talked a bit about being in places where you felt like, it wasn't where you belonged. Does that give you any sort of advantage? Do you come at things with a different perspective, or is it always just an added layer to the challenge?
I think you definitely come with a different perspective, but what is it that makes you feel like you don't belong in places? It could be that you don't see anybody else that looks like you. It could be that you don't know anything about those places. And for me, that's often it. I'm going into places I don't know anything about, and then I don't really see anybody that looks like me in those places.
Yeah.
So, I think, oh, do I belong in this space? And the truth is, I do belong in those spaces. It's just I'm often putting myself in these different rooms, and of course you bring different perspective. That's the beauty of people coming from different walks of life. Like I genuinely believe you can learn from everybody, and I actually think it's one of my greatest strengths, the ability to learn from everybody. How do I go and do something I don't know anything about? Well, I need to learn. I need to learn from people. And we've all worked in those teams where there is somebody that is difficult to work with or we find challenging to work with.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe you can learn from them too. Even if, let's say there's somebody you hate more than anything in the world, even if you're learning what not to do, you can learn. And I'd say open communication is, because I've worked with people who I found really challenging. And I remember once, and I wrote it down in my notebook because I was so nervous to have this conversation about why I was finding the relationship challenging, the work relationship. And they were really surprised. And I remember thinking, oh wow, I thought you would have realised this was the case. So that open communication, I think, is so important. But I think, yes, I think people can bring a lot to a room, and often, you might not be used to being in that space. And I think as a leader or manager, it's just making sure that everybody has a voice in that room as well, if that's what the room's for. And then you can find different ways about that.
No, it reminds me of a story from Pixar where they, like any company, you have challenging people, as you say, and people who thought it wasn't the right way to do things. And actually, they created a team of these people, and they really moved the game forward because they weren't willing to accept the status quo. They actually got these guys into a team and said, "Right, go on, have at it. Let's see." But you've talked to me briefly before about leaning into your strengths, and I know we've touched on that world record. Even though you're not a skier, you got this speed record. Can you talk a bit about how leaning into your particular strengths helped you achieve that?
So I remember after my second trip, so I failed this big trip. I've still got those two records. I thought, I wonder what I would need to do. So I spoke to some subject matter experts and I said, what could I change? And one of the things, okay, skis, could I be lighter on my feet as I'm moving forward? Can I change my gear? Now, with everything, there's risk, right? And we can talk about mitigating risk, but there's still going to be risk. So if I go with lighter boots, okay, sure, if I'm quicker, maybe I'll be warmer, but what if I'm not quicker?
Yeah.
So that, there is risk here. And then what am I actually good at? I'm good at admin. And by admin, I mean everything that's not skiing.
Okay.
But, a trip like this, it's more than skiing.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than skiing. Actually, 50% of your time is doing everything else. So that you've done your skiing for 12 hours. And even in between that, you're skiing an hour, you're taking a break. How long is your break? How long does it need to be? How quick can you be in that break? Having some fluids, having a snack and moving on. And again, the same the next hour. When you go into the toilet, how quick can you be? Like unzipping your gear, how much can you limit the faff? You're putting your tent up. How quick can you put your tent up? And then set everything, into the tent and put your stove on, heating boiling the snow, concurrent activity. So, it's rare that I'd only be doing one thing. So my snow's in my kettle and I'm boiling water as I'm doing my other bits of admin. So I'm trying to save time wherever I can. And then
Yeah.
as soon as I had done my admin and eaten my dinner, that's it. I'm going to sleep. And I'm waking up the next day and I'm doing the same thing again. I was trying to do nothing unless it was helping me move forward on that trip.
Mm,
And I had check-in calls on my satellite phone as well, and it was just I'm okay. This is my location, and then that's the next day. So I would say admin, and I do think that's a skill that I've learned from time in the military as well. How you pack your
yeah.
gear, where things are, just being really regimented. And when things do not go to plan, or sometimes it's a bad weather day, there's a whiteout and I can't see in front of me, so I'm going to move slower. It's more challenging. You just, okay, that's fine. You keep it regimented, you move through. And mistakes happened. Okay, I've injured myself, or which I did on my second trip. Okay, now I need to bring that in. I have to take pain relief at these times, and now manage that. So then there's that extra bit of admin I have to do in my tent. But all of that side is so important. I could be the physically fittest, fastest, whatnot person in the world. That doesn't mean that I'm going to do well out there, because everything else, you need to be able to manage yourself in those conditions. And if you make mistakes in those conditions, it can go wrong very quickly.
Yeah.
And what I found is it's so easy to ignore a little mistake. So
Yeah.
easy, and it snowballs. It snowballs, and then I find you're so deep. That's it. You then can't climb out of that mistake. It's
Can you
yeah.
give us an example of, because I love that you don't want to compound your errors, but kind of what sort of thing in your kind of experiences, what are the little errors that can add up, and how do you avoid that?
So there's a couple. So on my second trip, there's a few I made. So first one, I was so scared of failing. I pushed really hard at the start, and I hit a couple of storms, and I'm pushing hard. I'm looking down at my compass, and I actually injured my neck like a couple of days in. Now on these trips, I only take the amount of pain relief I think I'll need. I don't want to carry extra weight. What I didn't think is that I would need my pain relief 3 days into the trip.
Yeah.
So that then becomes an issue. So I have to ration my pain relief from pretty early on. The last 14 days, I only had I only had one pain relief tablet left, a codeine tablet, and I took that in the last 48 hours. And somebody asked me recently, actually, why in that last 14 days I waited in the last 48 hours, and I said it was something to look forward to.
Right.
I wouldn't let myself take it until I was in the last 48 hours. So that was a struggle. And again, what I didn't, so sleep was the other one. Now, I could have, let's say with my neck, I could have stopped and thought, okay, I'm going to do less time the next day, let my, kind of neck get a little bit better, which would have helped. But no, I'm too scared that I'm too far behind, so I can't give myself the time off. Same with sleep. I know better, I know that you have to sleep and rest and recover for the next day. I'm a physio as well. But again, I was so scared that I was falling behind time. I told myself, oh, it's okay, I'll just push it really hard this week, and then I'll level off and I'll be
Yeah.
doing the distance I want. And but it never did. So
Yeah.
the first week, my sleep is like I was skiing 15 hours, 4 hours sleep, 16 hours, 5 hours sleep. There was no routine, and I know better.
Yeah.
But again, that fear that I'm going to fall behind time, I'm not going to make it, and that just snowballed. That was terrible. I had nothing left at the end of this trip. I was deep in that hole that I was trying to kind of get myself out of, and I was just falling further into it. And the third trip, I slept 8 hours a night, where I got my speed record. And I think so. I think this mentality, and part of me thinks, maybe I have some of it from the military, but it was just that, just push
Yeah.
hard, keep
Yeah.
pushing, do not give up, push. And I just went into failure there because I'm pushing hard, not smart. And
Yeah.
that's important. I think that's how we can cause burnout and all sorts of things. And I definitely burnt out that second trip. The third one, I got the speed record. That is the only time I've been at the South Pole, and I could have kept going if I needed to, which is an amazing feeling to have. But I hadn't burnt out. I was smart. I slept every
Yeah.
night. So I had the energy to keep going the next day. And not, I wasn't not working harder. I was working hard for the hours, and
But
then I made
smarter.
myself start. I was working smarter, and that is so important. I also took loads of pain relief on the third trip. I didn't use any of it, but I was like, no way am I ever going to be in that position again where I don't have enough pain relief, because that was not fun at all. And in the last 2 weeks of the second trip, and the mistakes were unbelievable.
Yeah.
I was in such a bad place. It was everywhere. My stove was running low for the last couple of weeks. It was taking ages to boil water, and I just needed to probably take it apart, fix it, and put it back together. I just didn't have the energy to do so. One day, I opened my thermos, and it was frozen water in there, and I need the water to put it in my kettle before I put snow in, so it doesn't burn the kettle. And because obviously I hadn't closed it properly, I'm then using the other side of my spoon to stab it and get specks of ice into my kettle, which is then burning the water. But this, it was something. It was always something for the last couple of weeks, and they were from mistakes I'd made, like that. Yeah, it hasn't just suddenly frozen, but because I was so low on energy, I was then making these mistakes, and it just kept getting worse and worse.
So sometimes it sounds like we've got to stop, recognize the mistake, and go smarter, not harder, right? Slow down, reorganize, and push on again. But I mean, you're working against a deadline, a fairly serious deadline, but I'm sure, again, a lot of the audience know the feeling of being up against the deadline and you just pushing on. There's mistakes compounding in the background. But actually, we've got to take your second trip as a learning lesson, and your third trip where admin saved sort of must have been hours, right? You're getting 8 hours sleep a night. It just extraordinary. And I love the fact that admin can basically get you a world speed record as well.
It can.
Yeah, exactly. Can you talk to me a bit about the Arctic and what it sounds horrendous, I won't lie. So you clearly know. What are you doing differently this time? Are there any things that you've taken away from those trips, that lessons that you are now saying, right, I'm putting that in place for the North Pole?
Definitely working smarter. I've spoken to anyone that is happy to speak to me about it, first of all. So anybody who's been there as groups, guided, and like anybody who's been there solo, because they've been there, they know what the terrain was like, are challenging, what is challenging about it, which generally most people say the water is the most dangerous part, like getting into the water and obviously making sure you can
And
get
you
out.
said that earlier, you're going to have to swim.
Yes. So I have an immersion suit that I will put on, get into the water when there's sections of open water, leads, which I will be, and then get out on the other side, because I'm on sea ice.
So how long are you anticipating these swims are going to be? Are they 5 minutes? Are they 100 meters? What are they?
So I'd never get in the water unless I can see a part for me to get out.
Yes.
And this is the ground I'm on will be shifting, will be moving. That's the difference with Antarctica. So I could set my tent up and wake up in a different place. So if I see a section of open water, I might and I can't cross. First, I'd probably try east and west. Is there a point that looks better? Okay, well, if there's no way across, I might then just camp there and hopefully that it will hope that it will freeze over the next day, or it will look a bit different, but that it is changing, it's moving. So yes, there will be open water that I need to cross, the pressure ridges, and my sled will be at its heaviest. There will be hours of darkness, which is different to when I've been in Antarctica, and there's a big chance of injury. So I think in that time it's important for me not to go hard and fast, which it kind of reminds me of my second trip, and I think it'll be hard to do because I won't have that much time. So they used to have more time doing these expeditions. Now trying to get somebody to pick me up, and the majority of the cost is logistics, from the North Pole, there'll be a cut-off, and which means I need to be quick. So then managing to maybe not push too hard at the start is going to be challenging.
Wow. Well, look, I think I speak for myself, Max, and all the people who are tuning in, and all the Global Innovation Forum community, and wishing you the very best of luck for that trip. sounds like an incredible undertaking. And I'm sure, having spoken to you a couple of times, that no one is going to be better prepared than you to do it. So, come on, team admin, and good luck with that. And again, I'll just end by saying, look, please support Preet in this amazing adventure. Find the details and go to our website. There's a GoFundMe page there. I think it'd be fantastic.
Thank you.
Preet, I've had the pleasure of meeting and interviewing some very interesting people from all different walks of life on these Spark series, but I can honestly say this is the one I've enjoyed the most and learned the most from. I think you're incredible. What you do is incredible, but I think you're clearly an incredible woman and a great inspiration to everyone. For breaking down boundaries and barriers. So thank you so much for taking the time. I know your schedule is manic, but for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.